Told the eldest of the elders of Stedding Tsofu that you would look after him.
Gabriel marched on.
They told me you did. You did not call yourself Dragon then, but it was you. Wasn't it, Aerith? Did Ayla not say round all four?
She did not give the younger woman time for more than a nod. As her voice picked up speed, Hammond began to look pained.
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
Too young to be outside, too young to be running across the world, doing the things you no doubt have him doing.
It's not doing too bad.
About you. What has my loyal to do with the
a little
ring
sore, but
and the form barrier? You will hand him over to me now, please, so I can see him properly married to Aerith. She will settle his itchy feet. He's very handsome.
Aerith murmured shyly, her ears quivering so hard with embarrassment that the dark cuts blurred.
And I think he's very brave, too.
Took Rand a moment to regain his balance mentally. And Ogier being firm sounded much the same as a mountain falling, and Ogier being firm and speaking rapidly. By Ogier lights, Loyal was too young.
It'll probably be a little sore, but it'll probably be
Ogier were very long-lived.
A little worse
From the first day
if it wasn't just the outline.
Loyal had been worried.
But I couldn't have done
when the elders realized
the rest of it that shit was starting to hurt.
Most of all, he worried about his mother coming after him with a bride in tow. He said the man had no say in these things among Ogier, and the woman not much. It was all the two mothers doing. It was not beyond possibility to find yourself betrothed to a woman you had never met before the day your mother introduced you to your prospective bride and mother-in-law. Loyal seemed to think marriage would be the end of everything for him, certainly to all his wishes to see the world. And whether it would or not, Rand could not hand a friend over to what he feared. He was about to say he did not know what Loyal was, and suggested
the upper thigh is definitely something else. I thought I was getting off easy the first time I got my first one up there, which was that mushroom one I have. I thought I was getting off easy on that, but
how long has he been?
It definitely
too long.
It hurts, and it's
like boulders rolling downhill.
Burning, stinging type pain.
Never wanted to apply himself. Always talking about seeing outside, as if anything has really changed from what's in the books he should have been studying. What real change is it if humans change the lines on a map? The land is still. He has been outside much too long.
Loyal's mother put in as firmly as a post driven into dry clay. Hammond
after, at least after tonight, I'll be doing my lives in a different area.
5 years now,
Aerith said. For a moment, her ears
I'm gonna be
shot up and stubbornly back.
House sitting.
In a very good imitation of Kovril, she said,
for my mom and aunt tomorrow for a couple days while they go out of town.
I will not let him die, not from being foolish.
And Loyal had talked of many things, and one of them had been the longing, although Loyal had not liked talking about it.
Oh yeah, it'll go away.
It drove humans to flee for whatever safety they could find. It drove Ogier from the steading too. For long years, humans had wandered in a world that changed sometimes by the day, hunting that safety. And Ogier had wandered, hunting for the steading lost in the changing land. It was then that the longing entered them. An Ogier away from the steading wanted to return. An Ogier long from the steading needed to return. Ogier too long from the steading died. Of an Ogier who stayed out, Rand said quietly. 10 years, I think he said. Hammond was shaking his massive head before Rand finished.
It will not do. That I know of, 5 have remained outside that long and survived.
Yeah, my mom and Ann are heading to
such
I think Texas.
About and talked about. 3 of those died within a year of coming home. The 4th was an invalid for the rest of his life, and the 5th little better, needing a stick to walk.
Ozzy will be with me at my mom's, but Snoopy will be here still.
Dala had some interesting things to say concerning.
This time when Cobriel opened her mouth, his head whipped around, he stared at her, long eyebrows humping up, and she began smoothing her skirts furiously. But she stared right back.
5 years is a short time, I know,
Hammond told Rand, while watching Cobriel sharply from the corner of his eye.
But we are tied to the...
But I can't tell my mom, no.
We heard nothing in the city to indicate that Loyal is here, and from the excitement we ourselves caused, I think we would have. But if you will tell us where he is, you will be doing him a very great kindness.
2 rivers, Rand said. Saving a friend's life was not betraying him. When I last saw him, he was setting out in good company, with friends. It's a quiet place, the 2 rivers. Safe. Was now, again, thanks to Perrin. And he was, well, a few months ago. Bode had said as much when the girls were telling what had happened back home.
The 2 rivers,
Hammond muttered.
Yes, I know where that is. Another long walk.
Ogier seldom rode, there being few horses that could bear them, and they preferred their own feet in any case.
We must start out immediately,
Aerith said in a firm, if light rumble. Light compared to Hammond. Cobriel and Hammond looked at her in surprise, and her ears wilted completely. She was, after all, a very young woman, accompanying an elder, and a woman Rand suspected was of some importance in her own right from the way she stood up to Hammond. Aerith was probably not a day over 80. Smiling at the thought, a slip of a girl, maybe only 70. Rand said, "Please accept the hospitality of the palace. A few days' rest might even make your journey faster, and you might be able to help me, Elder Hammond." Of course. Loyal was always talking about his teacher, Elder Hammond. Elder Hammond knew everything, according to Loyal. I need to locate the way gates. All of them. All 3 Ogier spoke at once.
Way gates,
Hammond said, ears and eyebrows both shooting up.
The ways are very dangerous. Far too dangerous.
A few days, Aerith protested.
My Loyal could be dying. A few days,
Cobriel said on top of her.
My Loyal could be...
She cut off, staring at the younger woman, lips compressed and ears quivering. Hammond frowned at them both, stroking his narrow beard irritably.
I do not know why I let myself be talked into this. I should be teaching my classes and speaking to the stump. If you are not such a respected speaker, Cobriel. You mean if you were not married to my sister, she said stoutly. O'Neill told you to do your duty, Hammond.
Hammond's brows lowered till the long ends hung on his cheeks, and her ears seemed to lose most of their stiffness.
I meant to say she asked you,
she went on. Not hurriedly, exactly, not losing aplomb, but definitely not hesitating.
By the tree and stillness, I meant no offense, Elder Hammond.
Hammond harumphed loudly, which for an Ogier meant very loudly, and turned to Rand, tugging his coat as if it had been disarrayed. Auto spawn are using the ways, Rand said before Hammond could speak. I have to set guards on the few I can reach, including the one outside Stedding Tsofu, plainly after their departure. The could not have walked all the way from Stedding Tsofu after his last futile visit. A bare handful. All of them need to be guarded, or else Murdrol and Trollocs can come boiling out of nowhere, as far as anybody they catch is concerned. They don't even know where they all are. That would still leave gateways, of course. Sometimes he wondered why one of the Forsaken did not pour a few thousand Trollocs into the palace by a gateway. 10,000 or 20. He would be hard-pressed to stop that, if he could stop it at all. It would be a slaughter at best. Well, he could do nothing about a gateway unless he was there. He could do something about the waygates. Hammond exchanged looks with Cubrian. He drew aside, speaking in a whisper, and for a wonder it was low enough that all he heard was a buzz like a huge swarm of bees on the roof. He must be right about her having some importance. A speaker with a capital S. He had heard the capital. He considered seizing Sayedin. He would be able to hear then, and rejected it disgustedly. He had not sunk to eavesdropping yet. Aerith divided her attention evenly between her elders and Rand, all the while unconsciously smoothing her skirts. He hoped they did not inquire why he had not asked his question of the Council of Elders in Stedding Tsofu. Alar, eldest of the elders there, had been very firm. The stump was meeting, and nothing so odd, so peculiar as to never have been thought of before, as handing control of the waygates to a human could be done unless the stump concurred. Who he was hardly seemed to matter to her, any more than it did to these three. Finally, Hammond came back, frowning, and gripping the lapels of his coat. Cubriel was frowning too.
This is all very hasty, very hasty,
Hammond said in slow tones like gravel sliding.
I wish I could discuss it with him. Well, I cannot. Shadow spawn, you say? Very well. If there must be haste, there must be haste. Never let it be said that Ogier cannot move quickly when needs require. And perhaps they do now. You must understand the Council of Elders in any steading may tell you no, and so may the stump.
Maps! Rand shouted, so loudly that all three Ogier jumped. I need maps! He spun around, looking for one of the servants who always seemed to be about. For a Gaishan, anyone. Sulin put her head into the courtyard through a doorway. She would be nearby, after everything he had told her. Maps, he barked at her. I want every map in the palace. And a pen and ink. Now! Quickly! She looked at him almost disparagingly. Aiel did not use maps. Indeed, claimed not to need them, and turned away. Run, Farder Eyes My, he snapped. She looked over her shoulder at him, and ran. He wished he knew how his face looked, so he could recall it for use again. Hammond appeared as though he would be wringing his hands if his dignity had been just a little smaller.
Really, there is very little we can possibly tell you that you don't already know. Every steading has one just outside.
First waygates could not have been made inside, with the ability to channel blocked by the steading itself. Even when Ogier were given the talisman of growing, and could themselves make the ways grow to a new waygate, the power was still involved, if not channeling.
And all your cities that have Ogier groves, though it does seem the city here has grown over the grove. And in Alcair, Ra'in Alan.
He trailed off, shaking his head. The trouble could be summed up by that name. 3,000 years ago, near enough, there had been a city called Alcair, Ra'in Alan, built by Ogier. Today it was Kyrian, and the grove the Ogier builders planted to remind them of their steading was part of an estate that had belonged to the same Barthanas, whose palace now housed Rand's school. Nobody but Ogier and maybe some Aes Sedai remembered Alcair, Ra'in Alan. Not even Karianin. Ever Hammond believed much could change in 3,000 years. Great Ogier-built cities had ceased to exist, some leaving not so much as a name behind. Great cities had risen that the Ogier had no hand in. Amador, begun after the Trolloc Wars, was one, so Moraine had told him, and Chachin in Kandor, and Shol Arbella in Arafel, and Falmarin in Shinar. In Aradaman, Bandor Eban had been built on the ruins of a city destroyed in the War of the 100 Years, a city Moraine knew 3 names for, each suspect, and itself built on the ruins of a nameless city that had vanished in the Trolloc Wars. Rand knew of a waygate in Shinar, in the countryside near a moderate town that had kept part of the name of the huge city leveled by Trollocs, and another inside the Blight in shadow-murdered Mokir. Other places, there had simply been change or growth, as Hammond himself had pointed out. The waygate here in Camelin sat in a basement now, a well-guarded basement. Rand knew there was a waygate in Tyr, out in the great pasture land where the High Lords ran their famous horse herds. There should be one somewhere in the Mountains of Mist, where Manetheren had once stood, wherever that was. As far as Stedding went, he knew where to find Stedding Tsofu. Moraine had not considered Stedding or Ogier a vital part of its education.
You don't know where the Stedding are?
Hammond said incredulously when Rand finished explaining.
Is this Aiel humor? I have never understood Aiel humor.
For Ogier, Rand said gently, it has been a long time since the ways were made. For humans, it has been a very long time.
You do not even remember Mafalda Daranel, or Ankohima, or Ondarin Kor, or...
Gabriel put a hand on Hammond's shoulder, but the pity in her eyes was directed at Rand.
Does not remember,
she said softly.
Their memories are gone.
She made it sound the greatest loss imaginable. Eric, hands clasped to her mouth, appeared ready to cry. Sulin returned, quite deliberately not running, followed by a fat cluster of Gaishine, their arms filled to overflowing with rolled maps of all sizes, some long enough to drag on the courtyard paving stones. One white-robed man carried an ivory-inlaid writing box. I have set Gaishine looking for more, she said stiffly, and some of the wetlanders. Thank you, he told her. A little of the tautness went from her face. Squatting down, he began spreading maps right there on the paving stones, sorting them. A number were of the city, and many of parts of Andor. He quickly found one showing the whole stretch of the borderlands, and the light knew what that was doing in Camelin. Some were old and tattered, showing borders that no longer applied, naming countries that had faded away hundreds of years before. Borders and names were enough to rank the maps by age. The oldest, Hardan, bordered Cairhien to the north, then Hardan was gone, and Cairhien's borders swept halfway to Shinar, before creeping back as it became clear the Sun Throne simply could not hold on to that much longer.
Hell yeah.
Moredo stood between
Yeah, they usually
Tyr
does if you add some like tea and lemon.
Tyr and Ilion's borders met on the plains of Moredo, slowly falling back for the same reasons as Cairhien's. Garlane vanished, and Almeth, Rosara, and Irenveld, and others, sometimes absorbed by other nations, most often eventually becoming unclaimed in the wilderness. Those maps told the story of fading since Hawkwing's empire crumbled, of humanity in slow retreat. A second borderland map showed only Saldaea and part of Arafel, but it showed the Blight border 50 miles farther north, too. Humanity retreated, and the shadow advanced. Bald, skinny man in ill-fitting palace livery scurried into the courtyard with another armload, and Rand sighed and went on selecting and discarding. Hammond gravely examined the writing box that was held out to him by the Gaishine, then produced one almost as large, though quite plain, from a capacious coat pocket. The pen he took from it was polished wood, rather fatter than Rand's thumb, and long enough to look slender. It fit the Ogier's sausage-thick fingers perfectly. He got down on hands and knees, crawling among the maps as Rand sorted, occasionally dipping his pen in the Gaishine's inkpot, annotating in a handwriting that seemed too large until he realized that for him it was very small. Gabriel followed, peering over his shoulder, even after he asked the second time whether she really thought he would make a mistake. It was an education for Rand, beginning with 7 steadings scattered through the borderlands. But then Trollocs feared to enter a steading, and even Myrddraal needed some great purpose to drive them into one. The spine of the world, the Dragon Wall, held 13, including one in Kinslayer's Dagger, from Steading Shangtai in the south to Steading Kitchen and Steading Sanshan in the north, only a few miles apart.
The land truly changed in the breaking of the world,
Hammond explained when Rand commented. He continued marking briskly, though. Briskly for an Ogier.
Dry land became sea, and sea dry land. But the land folded as well. Sometimes what was far apart became close together, and what was close, far. Though, of course, no one can say whether Kitchen and Sanshan were far apart at all. You forgot Kantuan,
Covril announced, making another Liverick servant drop his fresh armlet of maps with a start. Hammond gave her a look and lettered in the name just above the river Irelel, not far north of Haddon Merk. In the strip west of the Dragon Wall, from the southern border of Shinar to the Sea of Storms, there were only 4, all newfound, as the Ogier considered it, meaning the youngest. Tofu had had Ogier back for 6,000 years, and none of the others for more than 1,000. Some of the locations were as big a surprise as the borderlands, such as the Mountains of Mist, which had 6, and the Shadow Coast. The Black Hills were included, and the forests above the river Ivo, and the mountains above the river Dagon, just north of Arad Daman. Adder was the list of Steading abandoned, given up because the numbers there had grown too few. The Spine of the World and the Mountains of Mist and the Shadow Coast were in that list too. And so was a Steading deep on Almouth Plain, near the great forest called the Parish Swar, and one in the low mountains along the north of Tumun Head, facing the Arath Ocean. Perhaps saddest was the one marked on the very edge of the Blight in Arafel. Myrddraal might be reluctant to enter a Steading, but as the Blight marched south year by year, it swept over everything. Pausing, Hammond said sadly,
Sherondu was swallowed by the Great Blight 1,843 years ago, and Chandar 968. May their memories flourish and flower in the light,
Covril and Aerith murmured together. I know of one you didn't mark, Rand said. Perrin had told him of sheltering in it once. He pulled out a map of Andor, east of the river Aranel, and touched a spot well above the road from Camelin to Whitebridge. It was close enough. Hammond grimaced, almost a snarl.
Where Hawkwing City was to be. That was never reclaimed. Though Steading were found and never reclaimed. We try to stay away from the lands of men as much as possible.
All of the marks were in rugged mountains, in places men found hard to enter, or in a few cases, just far from any human habitation. Steading Tsofu lay far closer than any other to where humans dwelled, and even then, Rand knew it was a full day to the nearest village.
This would be a fine discussion another time,
Covril said, directing her words to Rand, yet plainly meaning them for Hammond, as her sidelong looks indicated.
But I want to make as far west as I can before nightfall.
Hammond sighed heavily. Surely you'll stay here a while, Rand protested. You must be exhausted, walking all the way from Kyrian.
Women do not become exhausted, Hammond said. They only exhaust others. That is a very old saying among us.
Covril and Aerith sniffed in harmony. Muttering to himself, Hammond went on with his listing, but now it was cities that the Ogier had built. Cities where the groves had been, each grove holding its waygate to carry Ogier back and forth to the Steading without passing through the so often troubled lands of men. He marked, of course, and Tarvalon, Tyr and Ilion, Kyrian and Maradon, and Abu Dar. That was the end as far as cities that still existed were concerned. Abu Dar, he wrote, was Barashta. Perhaps Barashta belonged with the others in a way, with the dots made in places where the map showed nothing but a village, if that. Mafalda Daranel, and Kohima, and Gondaran Kor, of course, and Manetheren. Aren Mador, Aredol, Shemnal, Darenbar, Brain, Gondaris, Ayakoramon, Aimon. As that list grew, Rand began to see damp spots on each map when Hammond was done. It took him a moment to realize that the Ogier elder was weeping silently, letting the tears fall as he marked cities dead and forgotten. Perhaps he wept for the people, perhaps for the memories. The one thing Rand could be sure of was that it was not for the cities themselves, not for the lost works of Ogier masons. To the Ogier, stonework was only something they had picked up during the exile, and what work in stone could compare with the majesty of trees? One of those names more than tugged at Rand's memories, and its location as well, east of Berlon, several days above Whitebridge on the Arenal. Was a grove here, he said, fingering the mark.
At Arenhall?
Hammond said.
Yes. Yes, there was. A sad business, that.
And did not raise his head. Shadalogath, he corrected. A very sad business. Would you show me that waygate if I took you there? Chapter 21, to Shadalogath.
Take us there?
Cobril said, frowning formidably at the map in Rand's hands.
It will carry us well out of our way, if I remember where the two rivers is correctly. I will not waste another day finding Loyal.
Aerith nodded firmly. Hammond, cheeks still damp with tears, shook his head for their haste, but said,
I cannot allow it. Arenhall, Shadalogath, as you rightly name it now, is no place for someone as young as Aerith. In good truth, it is no place for anyone.
Letting the map fall, Rand stood up. He knew Shadalogath better than he wanted to. We'll lose no time. In fact, you'll gain. I will take you there by traveling, by a gateway. You will be most of the way to the two rivers today. Will not be long. I know you can lead me right to the waygate. Gear could sense waygates, if they were not too far. This necessitated another conference beyond the fountain, one Aerith demanded to be part of. Rand caught only snatches, yet it was plain that Hammond, shaking his great head doggedly, opposed the plan, while Cobril, ears so stiff it seemed she was trying for every inch of height, insisted on it. At first Cobril frowned at Aerith as much as at Hammond. Whatever the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law among Ogier, she clearly thought the younger woman had no business in this. It did not take her long to change her mind, though. The Ogier women flanked Hammond, hammering at him relentlessly.
Too dangerous, much too dangerous,
came like distant thunder from Hammond.
Almost there today.
A slighter thunder from Cobril.
He has been outside too long already.
An almost silvery peal from Aerith.
Haste makes for waste. My Loyal, my Loyal. Mashadar beneath our feet. My Loyal, my Loyal. As an elder, my Loyal, my Loyal.
And came back to Rand, tugging at his coat as though it had been ripped half off, followed by the women. Cobril maintained a smoother face than Aerith, who fought to suppress a smile, but their tufted ears were at the same jaunty angle, somehow conveying satisfaction.
We have decided,
Hammond said stiffly,
to accept your offer. Let this ridiculous gallivanting be done with so I can return to my classes and to the stump. There is much to be said about you before the stump.
Rand did not care whether Hammond told the stump he was a bully. Ogier held themselves apart from men except for repairing their old stonework, and it was unlikely they would influence any human one way or another about him. Good, he said. I will send someone to fetch your belongings from your inn.
I have everything right here.
Coverall went back around to the other side of the fountain, bent and straightened with 2 bundles that had been hidden behind the basin. Either would have made a heavy load for a man. She handed one to Aerith and slipped a strap tied to the other over her head so it slanted across her chest, holding the bundle against her back.
If Royal were here,
Aerith explained, donning her bundle,
we would be ready to start back to studying Tsofu without delay. If not, we would be ready to go on without delay. Actually, it was the beds,
Hammond confided, holding his hands to indicate a size to fit a human child.
Once every inn outside had 2 or 3 Ogier rooms, but they seem very hard to find now. It is difficult to understand.
He glanced at the marked maps and sighed.
It was difficult to understand.
Waiting just long enough for Hammond to fetch his own bundle, Rand seized Sayadine and opened the gateway right there beside the fountain. A hole in the air that showed a ruined street and collapsing buildings. Rand al'Thor! Suilin almost strolled into the courtyard, just ahead of a cluster of map-laden servants and Guy Shine. Laya and Cassan were with her, pretending to be just as casual. You asked for more maps? Sulin's glance at the gateway was barely short of accusing. Can protect myself better there than you can, Rand told her coldly. He did not intend it to be cold, but wrapped in the void, he could not make his voice anything but cold and distant. There's nothing your spears can fight, and some things they can't. Suilin still wore a good deal of her earlier stiffness. All the more reason for us to be there. It could not possibly make sense to anyone, not Aiel, but... I will not argue it, he said. She would try to follow if he refused. She would summon maidens who would try to leap through, even if he was closing the gateway. I expect you have the rest of today's guard just inside. Whistle them up. But everyone is to stay close to me and touch nothing. Be quick about it. I want this done with. His memories of Shadar Logoth were not pleasant. Sent them away as you insisted, Suilin said disgustedly. Give me a slow count of 100. 10. 50. Rand nodded, and her fingers flashed. Jelani darted away inside, and Sulin's hands flickered again. 3 Guy Shine women dropped their armloads of maps, looking startled. Aiel never looked that surprised. Gathered long white robes and vanished back into the palace in different directions. But quickly as they moved, Suilin was ahead of them. As Rand reached 20, Aiel began bounding into the courtyard, hurtling through windows, leaping down from balconies. He almost lost the count. Everyone was veiled, and only some maidens. They stared about in confusion when they found only Rand and 3 Ogier, blinked at them curiously. Some lowered their veils. The palace servants huddled together. The flow continued even after Suilin returned, unveiled, dead on the count of 50, the courtyard filling with Aiel. Quickly it became clear that she had spread the word the Ka Karn was in danger, the only way she felt she could gather enough spears in the time allotted. A little sour grumping passed among the men, but most decided it was a fine joke, some chuckling or rattling spears on bucklers. None left, though. They looked at the gateway and settled on their haunches to see what was happening. Ears sharpened with the power, Rand heard a maiden named Nandera, sinewy yet still handsome despite more gray than yellow in her hair, whisper to Suilin, "You spoke to Guy Shine as Fargar eyes mine." Sulin's blue eyes met Nandera's green levelly. "I did. We will deal with it when Rand al'Thor is safe today." "When he is safe," Nandera agreed. Sulin chose out 20 maidens quickly, some who had been part of the guard that morning, and some not. But when Urian began picking red shields, men from other societies insisted they should be included. That city through the gateway looked a place where enemies might be found.
Oh yeah, bow loaded.
Protected. If the truth be told,
might need it reloaded here in a sec, though.
From a possible fight, and the younger they were, the more likely to try to find one. Another argument almost started when Rand said the men could not number more than the maidens. That would dishonor Fardarai's Mai, since he had given them his honor to carry. And the maidens not more than Suilin had already chosen. He truly was taking them where no battle skills could protect them, and everyone who came with him was one more he would have to watch out for. That he did not explain. No telling whose honor he would step on if he did. "Remember," he said once they were sorted out, "touch nothing. Take nothing, not even a sip of water. And stay in sight always. Don't go inside any building for any reason." Hammond and Covril nodded vigorously, which seemed to impress the Aiel more than Rand's words. So long as they were impressed. They stepped through the gateway into a city long dead. A city more than dead. A golden sun, more than halfway to its zenith, roasted the ruins of greatness. Here and there a huge intact dome on top of the pale marble palace, but more were whole than not, and most often only a curved and broken fragment remained. Columned walks ran to towers as tall as anything Carian had ever dreamed of, and to towers ending jaggedly. Everywhere roofs had fallen in, bricks and stone fanned across fractured paving stones from collapsed buildings and walls. Shattered fountains and broken monuments decorated every intersection. Stunted trees, dying in the drought, dotted great hills of rubble. Dead weeds lined cracks in streets and buildings. Nothing moved, not a bird, not a rat, not a breeze. Silence shrouded Shadar Logoth. Shadar Logoth, where the shadow waits. And let the gateway vanish. No Aiel unveiled. The Ogier stared around, faces tight and ears laid stiffly back. Rand held on to Saidin in that fight that Taim said told a man he was alive. Even if he had not been able to channel, maybe especially then, he would have wanted that reminder here. Aradhol had been a great capital in the days of the Trolloc Wars, an ally of Manetheren and the rest of the 10 Nations. When those wars had lasted long enough to dwarf the War of the 100 Years, when it seemed the shadow was everywhere victorious, and every victory of the light did no more than buy time, a man named Mordeth became a counselor in Aradhol, and counseled the rule that to win, to survive, Aradhol must be harder than the shadow, more cruel than the shadow, less trusting. Slowly they made it so, until in the end, Aradhol became, if not blacker than the shadow, as black. With war still raging against the Trollocs, Aradhol finally turned in on itself, turned on itself, consumed itself. Something was left behind, something that had kept anyone from ever living here again. Not a pebble of this place but was tainted with the hatred and suspicion that had murdered Aradhol and left Shadar Logoth. Not a pebble but could infect with time. And more than the taint remained, though that was enough to keep any sane man away. And turned slowly where he stood, staring up at windows like empty eye sockets, the eyes gouged out. With the sun climbing high, he could feel unseen watchers. When he had been here before, that feeling had not come through this strongly until the sun began to go down. Much more than the taint remained. A Trolloc army had died camping here, vanished, except for messages smeared on walls in blood begging the Dark One to save them. Night was no time to be in Shadar Logoth. "The place frightens me," Lews Therin murmured beyond the void. "Does it not frighten you?" Rand's breath caught. Was the voice actually addressing him? Yes, it frightens me. There is darkness here. Blackness blacker than black. If the Dark One chose to live among men, he would choose here. Yes, he would. Must kill Demandred. Rand blinked. Does Demandred have some connection to Shadar Logoth? To here? Remember at last killing Ishamael. There was a sense of wonder in the voice, and a new discovery. He deserved to die. Lanfear deserved to die too, but I am glad I was not the one to kill her. Was it just happenstance that the voice seemed to speak to him? Was Lews Therin hearing, answering? What did you kill Ishamael? Tell me how. Death. I want the rest of death. But not here. I do not want to die here. Rand sighed. Just happenstance. He would not want to die here either. A nearby palace, broken columns along its front, had a distinct lean toward the street. It could fall any time and bury them where they stood. Lead on, he told Hammond. To the Aiel, he added, remember what I said. Touch nothing, take nothing, and stay in sight.
I did not think it would be so bad,
Hammond muttered.
It almost washes away the Waygate.
Beth moaned, and Coverell looked as though she would if she were not too dignified. Ogier were sensitive to the mood of a place. Hammond pointed. The sweat on his face had nothing to do with the heat.
That way.
Broken pavement crunched beneath Rand's boots like bones grinding. And directed them around corners and down streets, past one set of ruins after another. But his direction was sure. The encircling Aiel moved on their toes. Their eyes above the black veils did not look as if they expected attack, but as if the attack had already begun. The unseen watchers and broken buildings brought back memories Rand would as soon have avoided. Here Matt had begun a road that took him to the Horn of Valir, that almost killed him on the way. Maybe the road that had led him to Ruidian, and the Turan Grial he did not want to talk about. Here Perrin had disappeared when they were all forced to flee in the night, and when Rand finally saw him again, far from here, he had golden eyes and a sad look and secrets that Moraine had never shared with Rand. He had not escaped unscathed himself, though Shada Logat had not touched him directly. Thun Thane had followed them all here, himself and Mac and Perrin, Moraine and Lan, Nynaeve and Egwene. Adan Thane, peddler, and frequent visitor to the Two Rivers. Adan Thane, dark friend. More than dark friend now, and worse, so Moraine had said. Thane had followed them all here, but what left was more than Thane, or less. Thane, as much as he was still Thane, wanted Rand dead. He had threatened everyone Rand loved if Rand would not come to him. And Rand had not. Perrin had dealt with that, kept the Two Rivers safe, but like how it hurt. What had Thane been doing with the White Coats? Would Pedro not be a dark friend?
Lay down.
If I said I could be,
good boy,
then so could the Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light.
There it is,
Hammond said, and Rand gave a start. But Logith was the last place on Earth to lose yourself in thought. Where the elders stood had been a spacious square once, though a weathered mound of rubble filled one end now. In the middle of the square, where a fountain might have been, was instead an ornate filigree fence of some shiny metal, ogier high and untouched by rust. That enclosed what appeared to be a tall length of stone, carved with vines and leaves, so delicately done that you expected to feel the breeze that was riffling them, that you were surprised to realize they were gray, not green. The Waygate, though it certainly looked like no kind of gate.
We cut down the grove as soon as the Ogier departed for the steady.
Hammond muttered angrily, long brows drawn down.
No more than 20 or 30 years, and extended the city.
Rand touched the fence with a flow of air, wondering how to get through, and blinked as the whole thing collapsed into 20 or more pieces, which fell with loud shivering clangs that made the Ogier jump. Rand shook his head. Of course. Metal that had survived so long without a spot of rust must be power-wrought, maybe even remnants from the Age of Legends. But the joins that had held them together had long since corroded, awaiting one good shove. Coverell laid a hand on his shoulder.
I would ask you not to open it. No doubt Boyle told you how. He always did show too much interest in that sort of thing, but the ways are dangerous. I can lock it, Hammond said, so it cannot be opened again without the talisman of growing. A simple matter, simply done.
Did not seem eager, though. He certainly did not move any closer. It might have to be used without time for fetching anything, Rand told him. All the ways might have to be used, whatever the dangers. If he could cleanse them somehow, that was almost as grandiose as his boast to Taim that he would cleanse Saidin. He began weaving Saidin around the waygate, using all 5 powers, even lifting the segments of fence back into place. From the first flowy channel, the taint seemed to pulse inside him, a slow building vibration. It must have been the evil in Shadalogat itself, a resonance of evil to evil. When in the void, he felt dizzy from those reverberations, as though the world swung beneath his feet in time to them. They made him want to vomit up everything he had ever eaten. Still, he persevered. He could not send men to stand guard here any more than he could have had them search. What he wove, and then inverted, was a vicious sort of trap to suit a vicious place. Ward of surpassing nastiness. Humans could cross it unharmed, perhaps even the Forsaken. He could ward against humans or shadow spawn, not both. And even a male Forsaken could not detect it. Should any sort of shadow spawn pass through, that was the viciousness. They would not die right away. They might even live to make it beyond the city walls. Long enough for the dead to be far off, not here to frighten the next Murthrall that came. Long enough for a Trolloc army to exit, perhaps, picking up their own deaths as they did. Cruel enough for a Trolloc. Making the thing sickened him as much as the taint on Saidin. Tying off the weave and loosing Saidin brought only some relief. The residue of filth that always seemed to remain behind still throbbed. It almost felt as though the ground were throbbing beneath his boots. His teeth and ears ached. He could not wait to get away from here. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to channel again to open the gateway, and stopped, frowning. Quickly he counted everyone, then did it again, more slowly. Somebody's missing. Who? The Aiel took only a moment to confer. Liar, Sulan said through her veil. She was right behind me. There was no mistaking Jelani's voice. Maybe she saw something. He thought that was Desora. I told everyone to stay together. Rage washed across the void, waves breaking to froth on a boulder. One of them missing, here. And they took it with that light-blasted Aiel coolness. Maiden missing, a woman missing in Shadalogat. When I find her... Inch by inch, he fought down the fury that threatened to engulf the emptiness around him. What he wanted to do to Lyra was shout at her till she fainted, send her to Soralia for the rest of her life. That rage wanted white-hot murder. Split up in pairs. Shout. Look everywhere, but don't go inside. Not for any reason. And stay out of shadows. You can die here before you know it. You can all die before any of you know it. If you see her in a building, even if she looks just fine, find me, unless she comes out to you. We can search faster if we each search alone, he said, and Sulan nodded agreement. There were far too many nods. Pairs! And fought the fury down again. The light burn Aiel's stubbornness. At least that way you have somebody to watch your back. For once, do what I say when I say it. I've been here. I know a little about this place. A few minutes later, most spent in argument over how many should stay with Rand, 20 pairs of Aiel scattered. The one remaining was Jelani, Rand thought, though it was hard to tell with the veil. For once, she did not appear to be happy guarding him. The green eyes held a decided touch of sullenness.
I suppose we could make another pair,
Hammond said, looking at Covril. She nodded.
And Aerith can remain here.
No, Rand and Aerith said almost at the same instant. The older Ogier turned with faces of grave disapproval. Aerith's ears sagged until they looked ready to fall off. Rand grabbed hold of his temper firmly. Once it had seemed that in the void, any anger was off in the far distance somewhere, attached to him by no more than a thread. More and more it threatened to overwhelm him, to overwhelm the void, which might be disastrous. Aside from that, though, I'm sorry. I had no business shouting at you, Elder Hammond, or you, Speaker Covria. Was that the right way to say it? Was it even a title of that sort? Nothing in their expressions said either way. Would appreciate it if you would all stay with me. Then we can all search together.
Of course,
Hammond said.
I really don't see how I can offer you more protection than you can offer yourself. But it is yours.
Covril and Aerith both nodded approvingly. Brand had no idea what Hammond was talking about, but it did not seem the time to ask, with the three of them apparently bucked up to protect him. He had no doubt he could safeguard all three as long as they kept close. So long as you follow your own rules, Randolph Thor. The green-eyed maiden was indeed Jelani, and sounding heartened that she would not have to stand and wait, and hoped he had given the others a better idea of what this place was like. At the beginning, the search was frustrating. They walked up and down the streets, watched by invisible eyes, sometimes climbing over strewn rubble, taking turns calling Liar, Liar. Covril's shouts made leaning walls creak. Hammond's made them groan ominously. Nothing answered. The only other sounds were the shouts of the search parties and mocking echoes along the streets. Liar, liar. The sun had climbed nearly overhead when Jelani said, I do not think she would have gone this far, Randolph Thor. Not unless she was trying to get away from us, and she would not do that. Rand turned from peering through shadowed columns at the head of the wide stone steps, trying to see into a great chamber beyond. Far as he could make out, there was nothing in there but dust. No footprints. The unseen watchers had faded. They were not gone, even now, but almost. We have to search as much as we can. Maybe she... He did not know how to finish. I won't leave her here, Jelani. Sun swung higher and began to descend, and he was standing atop what had been a palace once, or maybe a whole block of buildings. It was a hill now, weathered enough over the years that only the number of broken bricks and pieces of worked stone sticking out of the dry soil said it had been anything else. Fire! He shouted through cupped hands. Fire! Randolph Thor, a maiden called from the street below, lowering her veil so he could see it was Sulin. She and another maiden, still veiled, stood with Jelani Yogi. Come down. He scrambled down in a cloud of dust and a shower of bits of brick and stone, moving so fast that he nearly fell twice. You found her? Sulin shook her head. We should have by now if she is alive. She would have not gone far on her own. If anyone carried her far, they carried her dead, I think. She would not go easily. And if she was injured too badly to answer our shouts, I think that also must mean she is dead. And sighed sadly. The Ogier women's long eyebrows dropped to their cheekbones. For some reason, their sad, pitying looks were directed at Rand. Keep looking, he said. May we look inside the buildings? There are many rooms we cannot see from outside. Rand hesitated. Well short of mid-afternoon yet, and he could feel the eyes again. As strong as they had been with the sun setting his first time here. Shadows were not safe in Shadaloga. No, but we keep looking. He was not sure how long he went on shouting his way up one street and down the next, but after a time, Urian and Sulin stepped in front of him, both unveiled. The sun sat at the treetops to the west, a blood-red ball in a cloudless sky. Shadows stretched long across the ruins.
I will search as long as you wish, Urian said, but calling and looking have done what they can. If we could search the buildings...
No. It came out a croak, and Rand cleared his throat. Like, but he wanted a drink of water. The invisible watchers filled every window, every opening. Thousands of them, waiting, anticipating. And shadows cloaked the city. Shadows were not safe in Shadaloget, but darkness brought out death. Mashadar rose with sunset. Kulin, He could not make himself say they had to give up, leave Laya behind, whether she was dead or alive, maybe lying somewhere unconscious, behind a wall or under a heap of bricks that might have tumbled down on her. She could be. Whoever watches us is waiting for nightfall, I think, Sulin said. I have looked into windows where something was looking back at me, but there was nothing there. Dancing the spears with something we cannot see will not be easy. Rand realized he wanted her to say again that Laya must be dead, that they could go. I could be injured somewhere. It was possible. He touched his coat pocket. The fat little man Angreal was back in Camelin with his sword and the scepter. He was not sure he could protect everyone once night fell. Moraine had thought the whole White Tower could not kill Mashadar, if it could be said to be alive. Quinn cleared his throat.
From what I remember of Ironhall,
He said, frowning.
Shadaloget, that is, when the sun goes down, we will probably all die.
Yes, Rand breathed the word reluctantly. Laya may be alive. All the others? Covril and Aerith had their heads together a little way off. He caught a murmur of loyal. Duty is heavier than a mountain, death lighter than a feather. Luce Theron had to have that from him. Memories passed both ways across that barrier, it seemed, but it cut to the heart. "You have to go now," he told them. "Whether Laya is alive or dead, we must go." Brian and Sulin only nodded, but Aerith moved closer and patted him on the shoulder with surprising gentleness for a hand that could have gripped his head.
I might trouble you,
Hammond said.
We have been rather longer than we expected.
He gestured to the sinking sun.
If you would do us the favor of carrying us outside the city in the same way you brought us here, I would appreciate it greatly.
Rand remembered the forest outside Shadaloget. No Murdral or Trollocs there this time, but a thick wood, and the light alone knew how far to the nearest village, or in what direction. "I will do better than that," he said. "I can take you straight to the two rivers as quickly." The two older Ogier nodded gravely.
The blessing of the light and stillness be on you for your health,
Covril murmured. Aerith's ears quivered with anticipation. Seeing Loyal and leaving Shadaloget. Rand hesitated. Loyal would probably be in it, but he could not take them there. Too much chance news of his visit would slip out of the two rivers. Away from the village, then, far enough to avoid the farm nearby. A flash of light appeared and widened. The taint pounded inside him again, worse than before. The ground seemed to beat at the soles of his boots. But as an Aiel leaped through, and the three Ogier followed with a haste that was not at all unseemly in the circumstances. Rand paused, looking back over the ruined city. He had promised to let the maidens die for him. As the last of the Aiel went through, Sulin hissed, and he glanced at her, but she was looking at his hand. At the back of his hand, where his fingernails had sliced a gash that oozed blood. Wrapped in the void as he was, the pain might have belonged to someone else. Physical mark did not matter. It would heal. He had made deeper inside, where no one could see. These men who died, and he never let them heal. He said, and gateway into the two rivers. The throbbing vanished with the gateway. Rand tried to orient himself. Placing a gateway precisely was not easy where you had never been before, but he had picked a field he did know, a weedy meadow a good 2-hour walk south of Emmons Field that no one ever used for anything. In the lurid twilight, he could see sheep, though, a sizable flock, and a boy with a crook in his hands, and a bow on his back, staring at them from 100 paces. Did not need the power in him to tell the boy was goggling, as well he might. Dropping the crook, he set off running for a farmhouse that had not been there when Rand was last here. A tile-roofed farmhouse. For a moment, he wondered whether he was really in the Two Rivers at all. No, the feel of the place told him he was. The smell of the air shouted home. All those changes Bode and the rest of the girls had told him about, they had not really sunk in. Nothing ever really changed in the Two Rivers. Should he send the girls back here, back home? What you should do is stay clear of them. It was an irritable thought. Emmons Field is that way, he said. Emmons Field. Aaron. Tem might be there too, but the Wine Spring Inn with the Gwain's parents. That is where Loyal should be. I don't know if you can make it before dark. Might ask at the farmhouse. I'm sure they will give you a place to sleep. Don't tell them about me. Tell no one how you came. The boy had seen, but a boy's tale might be taken for exaggeration when Ogier appeared. Adjusting the bundles on their backs, Hammond and Coverill exchanged looks, and she said,
We'll say nothing of how we came. Let people make the stories they wish.
Hammond stroked his beard and cleared his throat.
You must not kill yourself.
Even in the void, Rand was startled. What?
The road ahead of you,
Hammond rumbled,
is long, dark, and I very much fear bloodstained. I also very much fear that you will take us all down that road. But you must live to reach the end of it.
I will, Rand replied curtly. Fare you well. Tried to put some warmth into that, some feeling, but he was not sure he succeeded.
Fare you well,
Hammond said, and echoed it before all three turned toward the farmhouse. Not even Aerith sounded as if she believed he would, though. A moment longer Rand stood there. People had appeared outside the house, watching the Ogier approach. But Rand stared north and west, not toward Emmons Field, but toward the farm where he had grown up. When he turned away and opened the gateway to Camelin, it was like tearing his own arm off. The pain was a much more suitable memorial for Laya than a scratch. Chapter 22. Heading south. 5 stones made a smoothly spinning circle above Matt's hands, one red, one blue, one clear green, the others striped in interesting ways. He rode on, guiding Pips with his knees, the black-hafted spear thrust between the saddle girth on the opposite side from his unstrung bow. The stones made him think of Tom Marilyn, who had taught him to juggle, and he wondered if the fellow was still alive. Probably not. Rand had sent the Gleeman herring after Elaine and Nynaeve what seemed a very long time ago now, supposedly to look out for them. If any 2 women needed looking out for less, Matt did not know them. But no 2 were more likely to get a man killed because they would not listen to reason. Nynaeve, poking into everything a man did or said or thought, and tugging her bloody braid at a fellow all the time. And Elaine, the bloody daughter heir, thinking she could get her way by sticking her nose in the air and telling you what for, as bad as Nynaeve ever did. Only Elaine was worse, because if frosty high-handedness failed, Elaine smiled and flashed her dimple and expected everybody to fall down because she was pretty. He hoped Tom had managed to survive their company. He hoped they were all right, too, but he would not mind if they had found themselves in the pickling kettle at least once since scurrying off to the like new where. Let them see what it was like without him to haul them out, and never an honest word of thanks when he was there to do it. Not too hot a thing, just enough to make them wish Matt Coffin were around to rescue them again like an idiot. What about you, Matt? Elysian asked, reining closer. Did you ever think what it would be like to be a warder? Matt nearly dropped the stones. Darrett and Talmanas looked at him, sweaty-faced and awaiting an answer. The sun was sliding toward the horizon, not long before they would have to stop. Twilight seemed to last a little longer as the days shortened, but Matt wanted to be settled in with his pipe by dawn. Besides, in terrain like this, horses broke legs once the light failed. So did men. The band stretched out northward behind them, horse and foot beneath a rising tail of dust, bandits, drums silent, across low hills covered with sparse scrub and scattered thickets. 11 days since leaving Mayron, and they were halfway to Tyr, or a little better.
There's a little bit left in there still.
And only one full day spent resting the horses. He was certainly in no hurry to take Wireman's place, but he could not help wondering how much distance they could cover between sunup and sundown if they had to. So far, their best had been 45 miles, as near as anyone could calculate. Of course, the supply wagons took half the night catching up, but the foot had been making a point lately of showing they could match the horse over the long haul, if not the short. A little farther back and to the east, a band of Aiel crested a tree-fringed rise, running easily and slowly closing the distance. Likely they had been trotting since would until nightfall, if not later. If they passed the band, I'd like to see, the encouragement for tomorrow. Whenever Aiel passed them, they seemed ready to try for another mile or two the next day. A few miles ahead, they led into solid forest again. It would be necessary to drop closer to the Aranin before they reached that. As they crested a hilltop, Matt could see the river and the 5 hired riverboats flying the Red Hand. Or more were on their way back to Mayron to reload, mainly with fodder for the horses. What he could not see, yet knew were there, were the people, some meandering upriver, some down, some changing direction whenever they met a group led by someone with a convincing tongue. A handful had carts, usually pulled by themselves, and a few wagons, but most nothing beyond what they wore on their backs. Even the densest brigands had learned there was no point to bothering those. Matt had no idea where they were going, and neither did they. Yet they were just enough to clog the sorry excuses. Short of clubbing people out of the way, the band could make much better time up here. Warder? Matt said, touching the saddlebags. He could find more anywhere, but he liked the colors. He had an eagle feather in there, too, and a piece of weathered snow-white stone that might have been carved with scrolls once. There had been a boulder that looked as if it had been the head of a statue, too. But the thing would have needed a wagon. Never. They're all fools and dupes, letting Aes Sedai lead them around by the nose. What put a notion like that in your head? Milesian shrugged. He fairly oozed sweat, but he still wore his coat, red striped with blue today, buttoned to the neck. Matt's hung open, and he still thought he was broiling. Suppose it's all the Aes Sedai, the tyrant said. Burn my soul, it can't but make you think, can it? I mean, burn my soul, what are they up to? He meant the Aes Sedai on the other side of the Aranin, reportedly scurrying upriver or down, a sight quicker than the wanderers that were over there as well. Best not to think about them is what I say. Matt touched the silver fox head through his shirt. Even with that, he was glad the Aes Sedai were across the river. A handful of his soldiers traveled on each of the river craft, and few as villages were, they put a boat ashore on his orders at every one they passed on the far side to see what they could learn. So far, the news had been unrevealing and often unpleasant. Aes Sedai swarming was the least of it. And how are we not to think of them? Talmanis asked. Do you think the tower really did pull Logain's strings? That was one of the newer bits, just 2 days old. Pulled off his hat long enough to mop his forehead before answering. Nightfall would be a little cooler, but no wine, no ale, no women, and no gambling. Who would be a soldier for choice? There's not much I'd say was beyond Aes Sedai. Sliding a finger behind the scarf around his neck, he eased it. One thing about warders, by what he knew from observing Lan anyway, they never seemed to sweat. But that... Talmanis, I believe you were Aes Sedai first. Warrant, are you? Darrett doubled over the pommel of his saddle laughing, and Elysian nearly fell off his horse. Talmanis stiffened at first, but finally he grinned. He almost chuckled. The man did not have much sense of humor.
Oh, that was the last of the dab that I
His
had.
seriousness reasserted itself quickly, though.
I got my dab pins and I got
What
my
about
real
the dragon
tweets, so
swan?
I
If it is
can't
true,
complain
it
too
means
much.
trouble. The other's laughter might as well have been chopped with an axe. Matt grimaced. That was the newest news, or rumor, call it what you would, picked up yesterday. A village burned somewhere in Murandy. Worse, supposedly they had killed everybody who would not swear to the Dragon Reborn, and their families with them. And we'll settle for them, if it's true. Aes Sedai, Dragon Sworn, all that is his business, and we're well out of it. We have our own to tend. That made nobody's face less grim, of course. They had seen too many burned villages, and thought they would see more soon after reaching Tyr. Would be a soldier. A horseman appeared over the next rise ahead, galloping toward them, leaping his mount over brush rather than swerve around even on the downslope. Matt signed for a halt, adding, "No trumpets." Word rippled behind him in a fading murmur, but he kept his eyes on the rider. Dripping sweat, Chel Vannon reined his dun gelding in before Matt. A rough gray coat that fit his balding bulk like a sack. He sat his saddle like a sack, too. Vannon was fat, and no getting around it. Yet improbable as it seemed, he could ride anything ever born, and he was very good at what he did. Long before they reached Meron, Matt had surprised Nelisian, Darrett, and Telmanus by asking for the names of the best poachers and horse thieves among their men, the ones they knew were guilty but could not prove anything against. The two nobles in particular had not wanted to admit having any such men in their commands, but after a little prodding, they came up with the names of 3 Kyrianen, 2 Tyrans, and surprisingly, 2 Andorans. Matt had not thought any of the Andorans had been with the band long enough to make themselves known like that.
I got 2
but
pins
apparently,
left.
word got about. Those 7 men he
And
took
the
aside
good
and
thing
told
about
that he
these
needed
are
scouts, and that a good scout used much the same
they're
skills
both,
as a poacher or a horse thief.
2 grammars.
Ignoring fervent denials that they had ever committed any crime whatsoever, more from each than from Telmanus and Nelisian combined, and just as different, if far coarser. He offered pardons for any thefts done before that day, triple pay, and no work details as long as they reported the truth. And a hanging for the first lie. A lot of men could die from a scout's lie. And with the threat, they leaped at it, probably more for less work than for the extra silver. But 7 was not enough, so he asked them to suggest others, and to keep in mind what he said about the needed skills, as well as the fact that whether they lived to collect their triple pay would depend in large part on the abilities of those they named. That caused a lot of chin-scratching and edgy looks, but between them they produced 11 more names, emphasizing all the while that they were not implying anything about those fellows. 7 men, good enough poachers and horse thieves that neither Darrett nor Telmanus nor Nelisian had suspected them, but not good enough to avoid the notice of the first 7. Matt made those the same offer and asked for names again. By the time he reached a point where no more names were to be found, he had 47 scouts. Hard times had put a lot of men to soldiering instead of the craft they would rather have followed. The last, named by all 3 just before him, had been Chel Vannon, an Andoran who lived in Meron but ranged wide on both sides of the Arnon. Vannon could steal a hen pheasant's eggs without disturbing her on the nest, though it was unlikely he would fail to put her in the sack too. Vannon could steal a horse out from under a nobleman without the nobleman knowing it for 2 days. Or so his recommenders claimed in tones of awe. The gap-toothed smile and a look of utter innocence on his round face, Vannon had protested he was a stableman and sometime farrier, when he could find work. But he would take the job for 4 times the band's normal pay. So far, he had been more than worth it. Sitting his dun in front of Matt on that hilltop, Vannon looked disturbed. He approved of Matt not wanting to be called my lord, since he did not much like bowing to anyone, but he managed to knuckle his forehead casually in a rough sort of salute. I think you got to see this. I don't know what to make of it myself. You got to look for yourself. Here, Matt told the others, and to Vannon, show me. It was not a long ride, just over the next 2 hills and up a winding stream with wide borders of dried mud. The smell announced what Vannon wanted him to see before the first vultures waddled into the air. The others just flapped a few paces before settling again, darting featherless heads and squawking challenges. Worst were those that never looked up from their dinners, milling piles of stained black feathers. An overturned wagon, like a little house on wheels, virulently painted in green and blue and yellow, identified the scene as a tinker caravan. But few of the wagons had escaped burning. Bodies lay everywhere in bright clothes, torn and darkened with dried blood. Men and women and children. Part of Matt analyzed it coldly. The rest of him wanted to vomit or run. Anything but sit there on pips. The attackers had come from the west first. Most of the men and older boys lay there, mingled with what was left of a number of large dogs, as if they had tried to form a line to hold back killers with their bodies, while the women and children ran. A futile flight. Heaped corpses showed where they had run headlong into the second attack. The vultures moved now. Vannon spat disgustedly through a gap in his teeth. You chase them off before they steal too much. They'll snap up children if you don't look sharp. Raise them as their own. Maybe you add a kick to speed them, but you don't do this. Who would? I don't know. Brigands? The horses were all gone, but brigands wanted to steal, not kill, and no tinker would resist if you stole his last penny and his coat to boot. Forced his hands to ease their grip on his reins. There was nowhere to look without seeing a dead woman, a dead child. Whoever did this had not wanted any survivors. He rode a slow circuit around the site, trying to ignore the vultures that hissed and flared their wings when he passed. The ground was too dry to hold tracks well, although he thought horses had gone in several directions, and came back to Vannon. Could have told me about it. I don't need to see. Lied, but I don't. Could have told you there was no good tracks, Vannon said, turning his horse to wade the shallow stream. Maybe you need to see this. Fire had taken most of the wagon lying on its side, but the wagon bed survived, propped on yellow wheels with red spokes. A man in a coat that still showed a little eye-wrenching blue lay hard against it, one sprawled hand black with blood. What he had written in shaky letters stood out darker than the wood of the wagon bottom. The dragon reborn. Tell him what? Matt thought. That somebody had killed a whole caravan of tinkers? Or had the man died before he could write whatever it was? It would not have been the first time tinkers had come on to important information. In a story, he would have lived just long enough to scrawl the vital bit that meant victory. Whatever the message, nobody was ever going to know a word more now. You were right, Vannon. Matt hesitated. Tell the Dragon Reborn what? No reason to start any more rumors than they already had. See the rest of this wagon burns before you leave. And if anybody asks, there was nothing here but a lot of dead men. Women and children. Vannon nodded. Filthy savages, he muttered, and spat through his teeth again. Could have been some of them, I suppose. That band of Aielmen had caught up, 300 or 400 strong. They trotted down the slope and crossed the stream no more than 50 paces from the wagons. Umber raised a hand in greeting. Matt did not recognize them, but a good many Aiel had heard of Randolph Thor's friend, he who wore the hat, and whom it was better not to gamble against. Across the stream and up the next slope, and all those bodies might as well not have existed. Bloody Aiel, Matt thought. Knew that Aiel avoided tinkers, ignored them, if not why. But this? I don't think so, he said. See, it burns, Vannon. Talmanis and the other two were right where he had left them, of course. When Matt told them what lay ahead and that burial parties had to be told off, they nodded grimly, Darrett muttering a disbelieving, "Tinkers?" "We'll camp here," Matt added. He expected some comment. There was light left for a few more miles, and these three had gotten caught up in how far the band could move in a day to the point of laying wagers. But Elysian just said, "I'll send a man down to signal the ships before they get too far ahead." Maybe they felt the way he did. Unless they swung all the way over to the river, there would be no avoiding at least the sight of vultures scattering into the sky from the burial parties. Just because a man had seen death did not mean he had to enjoy it. For Matt's part, he thought another look at those birds would empty his stomach. In the morning, there would be only graves, safely out of earshot. The memory would not go out of his head, though, even after his tent was raised on that very hilltop where it might catch a breeze off the river if one ever decided to rise. Bodies hacked by killers, ravaged by vultures. Worse than the battle around Kyrian against the Shido. Maidens had died there, but he had not seen any, and there had been no children. A tinker would not fight even to defend his life. Nobody killed the traveling people. He picked at his beef and beans and retired to his tent as soon as he could. And Elysian did not want to talk until Manus looked tighter than ever. Word of the killing had spread. There was a quiet over the camp Matt had heard before. Usually the darkness would be broken by at least a little raucous laughter and sometimes songs, off-key and off-color, until the bannermen drove a handful who would not admit they were tired to their blankets. Tonight was like the times they had found a village with the dead unburied, or a group of refugees who had tried to keep their little from bandits. Who could laugh or sing after that, and those who could were usually silenced by the rest. Matt lay smoking his pipe while darkness fell, but the tent was close and sleep would not come for memories of Tinker dead. Older memories of older dead. Too many battles and too many dead. He fingered his spear, traced the inscription in the old tongue along the black shaft. Thus is our treaty written, thus is agreement made. Thought is the arrow of time, memory never fades. What was asked is given, the price is paid. He had gotten the worst of that deal. After a time, he gathered a blanket, and after a moment, the spear. And padded outside in his small clothes, the silver fox head on his bare chest catching the light of the clipped moon. There was a slight breeze, a meager stirring with little coolness that scarcely shifted the red-hand banner on its staff, stuck in the ground before his tent. Yet better than inside. Tossing his blanket down among the scrub, he lay on his back. When he was a boy, he'd sometimes used to put himself to sleep naming the constellations. In that cloudless sky, the moon gave enough light to wash out most stars, even if it was waning. But it left enough. There was the hay wain, high overhead, and the 5 sisters, and the 3 geese pointing the way north. The archer, the plowman, the blacksmith, the snake. Ayuk called that one the dragon. The shield, that some called Hawkwing's shield, that made him shift. In some of his memories, he did not like Artapan Dragtonreal at all. Stag and the ram. The cup and the traveler with her staff standing out sharp. Something caught his ear. He was not sure what. If the night had not been so still, the faint sound might have seemed furtive. But it was, and it did. Who would be sneaking around in here? Yes, he lifted up on an elbow and froze. Like moon shadows, shapes moved around his tent. Moonlight caught one enough for him to make out a veiled face. Are you? What under the light? Silently they surrounded the tent, closed in. Bright metal flashed in the night, whispers of cloth being sliced, and they vanished inside. A moment only, and they were back out, and looking around. There was light enough to see that. Matt gathered his feet under him. If he kept low, he might be able to slip away without being heard. "Matt!" Talmanes called up the hillside. He sounded drunk. Matt went still. Maybe the man would go back if he thought he was asleep. The Aiel seemed to melt away, but he was sure they had gone to ground where they were. Talmanes' boots crunched closer. "I have some brandy here, Matt. I think you should take it. It is very good for dreams, Matt. You do not remember them." Matt wondered whether the Aiel would hear him over Talmanes if he went now.
Oh yeah, it's
10 paces
definitely
or
be
so
a
to
nice
where the
one.
nearest men would be sleeping.
And what I like
First
about
man
it
up
is
was Talmanes'
it's
thunderbolt
an original
at the
design,
corner tonight. Less than
and
10 to his
counting
back
me,
to the Aiel.
only 3
They
people
were
have it.
fast, but with a step or two, they should not catch
Me.
him before he had 50 men almost within arm's reach.
Most hated,
Matt, I do not
and
believe you
our
are
other,
asleep, Matt.
our older
I saw
brother
your face.
Gizmo have it.
It is
So
better
it's only
once
3
you kill
people
the
to have it.
dreams. Believe me, I know.
And most hateds had that
Matt crouched, clutching his
that
spear and
design
taking a deep
for
breath.
over
2 strides.
20 years.
Ah! Talmanes was nearer. The idiot was going to step on an Aiel any time now. They would cut his throat without making a sound. Burn you, Matt thought. All I needed was 2 strides. "Swords!" he shouted, leaping upright. "Aiel in camp!" He sprinted down the slope. "Rally to the banner! Rally to the Red Hand! Rally, you dog-riding grave robbers!" That woke everyone, of course, as well it should, with him bellowing like a bull in briars. Outspread in every direction. Drums began beating assembly, trumpets sounding rally. Men of the first horse roared out of their blankets, racing toward the banner, waving swords. Still, the fact was, the Aiel had a shorter distance to run than the soldiers, and they knew what they were after. Something, instinct, his luck, being Taviran, that certainly did not hear anything over the racket, made him turn just as the first veiled shape appeared behind, as if springing out of the air. No time to think. He blocked the thrust of a stabbing spear with the haft of his spear, but the Aiel a turn slash on a buckler and kicked him in the belly. Desperation gave Matt strength to keep his legs straight with no air in his lungs. He twisted aside frantically from a spearhead that sliced his ribs, flipped the Aiel's legs out from under him with his own spear haft, and stabbed him through the heart. Light, but he hoped it was a him. He jerked the spear free just in time to face the onslaught. I should have run when I first had the bloody chance.
Be
Worked
right
the thing
back.
like a quarterstaff as fast as he ever had in his life. Spinning, blocking away lancing Aiel spear points, no time to strike back. Too many. I should have kept my bloody mouth shut and run. He found breath again. "Rally, you pigeon-gutted sheep stealers! Are you all deaf? Clean out your ears and rally!" Wondering why he was not dead yet, he had been lucky with one Aiel, but nobody had enough luck to face this. He suddenly realized he was no longer alone. A skinny Kyrienin in his small clothes fell nearly under his feet with a shrill yell, only to be replaced by a Tyran with his shirt flapping and sword swinging. More crowded in, shouting everything from Lord Matrimon victory to the Red Hand to kill the black-eyed vermin. Slipped back and left them to it. The general who leads in the front of a battle is a fool. That came from one of those old memories, a quote from somebody whose name was not part of the memory. A man could get killed in there. That was pure Matt Coffin. In the end, it was a sheer matter of numbers. A dozen Aiel, and if not the whole band, several hundred who managed to reach the hilltop before it was done. 12 Aiel dead, and because they were Aiel, half again as many of the band, with twice that or more bleeding and still alive to groan, while they were tended. Even with his brief exposure, Matt stung and bled at half a dozen places, at least 3 of which he suspected would need stitching. Spear made a good walking staff as he limped around to where Talmanes was stretched out on the ground, with Derrid tying a tourniquet around his left leg. Talmanes' white shirt, hanging loose, glistened darkly in 2 places. "It seems," he panted, "Nerem will get to try his hand as a seamstress on me again. Burning for a ham-fisted bull." Nerem was his serving man, and mended his master as often as his master's clothes. "Will he be all right?" Matt asked softly. Derek shrugged. He wore only his breeches. He's bleeding less than you, I think. He glanced up. He would have a new scar to add to the collection on his face. As well you got out of their way, Matt. It is clear they were after you. Not to give them what they came for. Wincing, Tomanis struggled to his feet with the aid of an arm over Derek's shoulder. It would be a shame to lose the band's luck to a handful of savages in the night. Matt cleared his throat. That's the way it seemed to me, too. The image of the Aiel vanishing into his tent welled up in his mind, and he shivered. Why under the light would Aiel want to kill him? Nelisian appeared from where the dead Aiel were laid out in a row. Even now he had his coat on, though not buttoned. He kept frowning at a bloodstain on the lapel. Maybe his blood, maybe not. On my soul, I knew those savages would turn on us sooner or later. I expect they came from that lot who passed us earlier. I doubt it, Matt said. If they had wanted me, they could have had me spitted and over the fire for dinner before any of you knew it. He made himself hobble over and study the Aiel, taking a lantern someone had brought to aid the moonlight. The relief of finding only men's faces nearly unhinged his knees. He did not know any of them, but then he did not really know many Aiel. Shido, I expect, he said, returning to the others with the lantern. They could be Shido. They could be dark friends. He knew all too well that there were dark friends among the Aiel. And dark friends, of course, did have reason to want him dead. Tomorrow, Derek said, I think we should try to find one of those Aes Sedai across the river. Talmanis here will live unless all the brandy leaked out of him, but some of the others might not be so fortunate. Elysian said nothing, but his grunt spoke volumes. He was Tyron, after all, with less love than Matt for Aes Sedai. I did not hesitate in agreeing. He would not be letting any Aes Sedai channel at him. In a way, every scar marked a small victory. Another time he had avoided Aes Sedai. But he could not ask a man to die. Then he told them what else he wanted. A ditch, Talmanis said in tones of disbelief. All the way around the camp? Elysian's pointed beard quivered. Every night? And a palisade? Derek exclaimed. Glancing around, he lowered his voice. There were still quite a few soldiers about, hauling away the dead. There will be a mutiny, Matt. No, there won't, Matt said. By morning, every last man will know Aiel sneaked through the whole camp to reach my tent. Half won't sleep for thinking they will wake with an Aiel spear in their ribs. 3 make sure they understand the fact that a palisade just might keep Aiel from sneaking in again. At the least, it would slow them down. Now go away and let me get a little sleep tonight. After they had gone, he studied his tent. Long slashes in the walls where Aiel had gone in stirred in the fitful breeze. Sighing, he started to return to his blanket in the scrub, then hesitated. That noise that had alerted him. The Aiel had not made another, not a whisper. A shadow made as much noise as an Aiel. So what had it been? Leaning on his spear, he limped around the tent, studying the ground. He was not sure what he was looking for. Soft Aiel boots had left no marks that he could make out by lantern light. 2 of the tent ropes hung where they had been cut, but he set the lantern down and fingered the ropes. That sound could have been taut rope being sliced, yet there was no reason to cut these to get inside. Something about the angle of the cuts, the way they lined up with one another, caught his attention. Taking up the lantern, he cast around. A wiry bush not far away had been trimmed along one side, thin branches with small leaves lying on the ground. A very neat trimming, perfectly flat. The severed branch ends smooth, as though planed by a cabinet maker. The hair on the back of Matt's neck stirred. One of those holes in the air that Rand used had been opened here. Bad enough that Aiel had tried to kill him, but they had been sent by somebody who could make one of those gateways, Rand called them. And if he was not safe from the Forsaken with the band around him, where was he safe? He wondered how he was going to sleep from now on with watchfires around his tent. And guards. A guard of honor, he could call it, to take some of the sting away, to stand sentry around his tent. Next time, it would probably be 100 Trollocs, or 1,000 instead of a handful of Aiel. Or was he important enough for that? If they decided he was too important, the next time it could be one of the Forsaken. Blood and ashes. He had never asked to be Ta'veren, never asked to be tied to the dragon Bloody Reborn. Blood and bloody... Soil crunching underfoot warned him, and he spun, swinging the spear with a snarl. Barely in time, he stopped the slashing blade as Oliver screamed and fell flat on his back, staring wide-eyed at the spear point. "In the bloody pit of doom are you doing here?" Matt snapped. I... The boy stopped to swallow. "They say 50 Aiel tried to kill you in your sleep, Lord Matt. But you killed them first, and I wanted to see if you were all right, and Lord Adorian bought me some shoes, see?" He raised a shod foot. Muttering under his breath, Matt hauled Oliver to his feet. "That wasn't what I meant. Why aren't you in Mayron? Didn't Adorian find somebody to look after you?" "She just wanted Lord Adorian's coin, not me. She had 6 children of her own. Master Burden gives me lots to eat, and all I have to do is feed and water his horses and rub them down. I like that, Lord Matt. You will not let me ride them, though." The throat cleared. "Lord Talmanas sent me, my lord." Aram was short, even for a Carianan. A skinny, gray-haired man with a long face that seemed to say nothing was going well at the moment, and in the long run, this was a better day than most. "If my lord will pardon me for saying, those bloodstains will never come out of my lord's small clothes, but if my lord will allow it, I may be able to do something for the tears in my lord." He had his sewing box under one arm. "You, boy, fetch some water. No back talk. Water for my lord, and quickly." Aaron combined, picking up the lantern with a growl. "My lord will step inside. Night air is bad for wounds." In short order, Matt was stretched out beside his bedding. "My lord will not want to stain his blankets," letting Aaron wash away dried blood and sew him up. Talmanas was right. As a seamstress, the man was a ham-fisted cook. With Oliver there was no choice but to grit his teeth and bear it. To try taking his mind elsewhere than Naram's needle, Matt pointed to the frayed cloth strip hanging from Oliver's shoulder. "What do you have in there?" he panted. Oliver clutched the tattered bag to his chest. He was certainly cleaner than he had been, if no prettier. The shoes appeared stout, and his woolen shirt and breeches looked new. "It is mine," he said defensively. "I did not steal anything." After a moment, he opened the bag and began laying things out. A spare pair of breeches, 2 more shirts, and some stockings had no interest for him, but he listed the other things. "This is my red hawk's feather, Lord Matt, and this stone is just the color of the sun, see?" He added a small purse. "I have 5 coppers and a silver penny." Rolled cloth tied with a string and a small wooden box. "My game of snakes and foxes. My father made it for me. He drew the board." For a moment, his face crumpled, then he went on. "And see, this stone has a fish head in it. I do not know how it got there. And this is my turtle shell. A blue-black turtle. See the stripes?" Wincing at a particularly hard thrust of the sewing needle, Matt stretched his hand to finger the rolled cloth. Much better if he breathed through his nose. It was odd how those holes in his real memories worked. He could remember how to play snakes and foxes, but not ever playing it. "That's a fine turtle shell, Oliver. I had one once. A green basker." Stretching his hand the other way, he reached his own purse. He dipped out 2 gold Carianan crowns. "Add these to your purse, Oliver. The man needs a little gold in his pocket." Stiffly, Oliver began stuffing things back into his scrip. "I do not beg, Lord Matt. I can work for my supper. I am not a reason to pay the boy 2 crowns. I need someone to carry messages for me. Can't ask any of the band. They are all busy soldiering. Of course, you'd have to take care of your own horse. I could not ask anybody to do it for you. Oliver sat up straight. I would have my own horse? He said incredulously. Of course. There is one thing. My name is Matt. You call me Lord Matt again, and I'll tie your nose in a knot. Bellowing, he jerked half upright. Burn you, Nero. That's a leg, not a bloody side of beef. As my lord says, Nero murmured, my lord's leg is not a side of beef. Thank you, my lord, for instructing me. Oliver was feeling his nose hesitantly, as if considering whether it could be tied in a knot. Matt settled back with a groan. Now he had saddled himself with a boy, and had done the lad no favor, not if he was nearby the next time the Forsaken tried to reduce the number of Taviran in the world. Well, if Rand's plan worked, there would be one less Forsaken. If Matt Coffin had his way, he intended to stay out of trouble and out of danger until there were no Forsaken.
23. To understand a message. Grendel managed not to stare as she entered the room, but her Strife gown went dead black before she could control herself and return it to a blue mist. Samael had done enough to make anyone doubt that this chamber was in the Grand Hall of the Council in Ilion, but then she would be very surprised if anyone but he ever penetrated this far uninvited into Lord Bren's apartments. The air was pleasantly cool. In one corner rose the hollow cylinder of an exchanger. Glow bulbs, bright and steady, stood oddly in heavy gold candle holders, giving much better illumination than candles or oil lamps ever could. A small music box sat on the marble mantelpiece, producing from its memory the soft strains of a sound sculpture that very likely had not been heard outside this room in well over 3,000 years. And she recognized several of the artworks on the walls. She paused in front of Seren Toll's Tempo of Infinity, not a copy. One might think you had looted a museum, Samael. It was hard to keep the envy from her voice, and when she saw his faint smile, she realized she had failed. Filling 2 silver-chased goblets with wine, he handed her one. Only a stasis box. I suppose people tried to save what they could in the last days. His smile pulled at that awful scar across his face as he beamed around the chamber, with a special fondness for the Zara board projecting its field of still transparent boxes in the air. He had always liked the more violent games. Of course, a Zara board meant his stasis box had been filled by someone who followed the Great Lord. Possession of a single once-human playing piece had meant imprisonment at the least on the other side. What else had he found? Sipping her wine, and suppressing a sigh, it was from the here and now. She had hoped for a delicate satare, or one of the exquisite comolades. She stroked her gown with beringed fingers. I found one as well, but beyond strife, it contained the most appalling collection of useless rubbish. After all, since he had invited her here and let her see this, it was a time for confidences. Small confidences. How sad for you. Again that faint smile. He had found something more than playthings and pretties. On the other hand, he went on, think how awful it would have been to open a box and rouse a nest of Kafar, say, or a Jumara, or one of Agenor's other little creations. Did you know there are Jumara loose in the Blight? Full grown, though they'll never transform now. They call them worms. He laughed so hard at that he shook. Grendel smiled a good deal more warmly than she felt inside, though, if her gown changed color, it was by a hair. She had had an unpleasant, in fact almost fatal experience with one of Agenor's creations. The man had been brilliant in his way, but mad. None but a madman would have made the golem. You seem in very good mood. Why should I not be? He said expansively. I all but have my hands on a cache of Angreal, and who can say what else? Do not look so surprised. Of course, I've known that the rest of you have been trying to look over my shoulder in hopes I will lead you to it. Well, it will do you no good. Oh, I will share, but after it's mine, and after I have first choice. Sprawling in a heavily gilded chair, or perhaps it was solid gold, that would be like him, he balanced one boot atop the toe of the other and stroked his golden beard. Besides, I sent an emissary to Althor, and the answer was favorable. Grendal almost spilled her wine. It was? I heard that he killed your messenger. If her knowing that much shook him, he held it in. He even smiled. Althor killed no one. Andres went there to die. Do you think I wanted to wait on couriers or pigeons? How he died told me Althor's answer, which was, she said carefully, a truce between us. Icy fingers seemed to dig into her scalp. It could not be true. Yet he looked more at ease than she had seen him since waking. Luz Theron would never lose. Theron is long dead, Grendal. The interruption was amused, even mocking. No anger at all. She covered a deep breath by pretending to drink. Could it be true? His army is still gathering in Tyr. I have seen it. That hardly looks like a truce to me. Samael laughed outright. It takes time to redirect an army. Believe me, it will never move against me. You think not? One or two of my little friends say he wants you dead because you killed some of his pet maidens. Were I you, I would be thinking about somewhere less conspicuous, somewhere he might not find me. Not a flicker of an eyelid out of him. It was as if all the strings that usually moved him had been cut. What should it matter if few maidens died? The look on his face was truly puzzled. It was battle. Soldiers die in battle. Althor may be a farmer, but he has generals to fight his battles and explain matters. I doubt he even noticed. Really never have looked at these people. They have changed as much as the land, Samael. Not just the Aiel. In some ways the rest have changed much more. Those soldiers were women, and to Rand al'Thor that makes a difference. He shrugged dismissively, and she suppressed contempt, kept the strife steady in a calm fog. He had never understood that you must understand people to make them do as you wished. Compulsion was all very well, but you could not use compulsion on the entire world. She wondered whether the stasis box had been this cache that he claimed he would put his hands on soon. If he had even one Angreal. If he did, she would find out, but probably not before he'd let her. I suppose we shall see how much wiser the primitive Luz Theron has become, then. She raised a doubting eyebrow, managed a smile of her own. No reaction. Where had he found this leash for his temper? Luz Theron's name alone should have been enough to loose it. If he fails to chase you out of Ilion like a Kosa scampering up a tree, perhaps that might be waiting too long. He cut in smoothly. Too long for you, that is. Is that supposed to be a threat, Samael? Her gown shifted to a pale rose, but she let it stay. Let him be aware she was angry. I thought you learned long ago that threatening me is a mistake. No threats, Grendal, he replied calmly. All of his pressure points had gone numb. Nothing seemed to shift him out of that amused coolness. Merely facts. al'Thor will not attack me, and I will not attack him. And of course I agreed not to aid any other chosen should al'Thor find them. All very much in accordance with the Great Lord's commands, wouldn't you say? Of course. She kept her face smooth, but the strife had gone a deeper rose, losing some of its mistiness. In part, the color was still anger. There was more to this, but how was she to find out? Which means, he continued, that on the day of return I will very likely be the only one remaining to face al'Thor. I doubt he will manage to kill all of us, she said acidly, but acid churned in her stomach as well. Too many of the chosen had died. Samael had found a way to stand aside until the last. It was the only explanation. You think not? Not even if he learns where you all are? That smile deepened. I'm sure I know what Demondred is scheming, but where is he hiding? Where is Semirag? Messana? What about Asmodean and Lanfear? Mogedion? Those cold fingers returned, imprinting themselves on her skull. He would not lounge there and talk this way. He would not dare suggest what he was suggesting unless... Asmodean and Lanfear are dead, and I am sure Mogedion must be too. She was surprised to hear her own voice, hoarse and unsteady. Wine did not seem to dampen her dry throat. The others? It was just a question. His voice was not in the slightest insistent. It sent a shiver through her. I've told you what I know, Samael, which is nothing. When I am nameless, I will choose who stands just below me. That one will have to be alive to receive the Great Lord's touch. Are you saying you have been to Sheol Ghul? That the Great Lord promised you? You will know all when it is time and not before. But a small advice, Grendel. Prepare now. Where are they? Her mind worked furiously. He must have had that promise. He must. But why him? No, there was no time for speculation. The Great Lord chose as he wished, and Samael knew where she was at least. She could flee Aradoman, establish herself elsewhere. It would not be difficult. Giving up the little games she played there, and even the larger games that might have to be abandoned, would be a small loss compared with having Althor, or Luz Theron, come after her. She had no intention of ever confronting him directly. If Ishamael and Ravine had fallen to him, she was not about to risk his strength, not head-on. Samael must have had the promise. If he died now, he was certainly holding Saidin. He would be mad to say these things otherwise, and he would feel the instant she embraced Saidar. She would be the one to die. He must have had it. I do not know where Dimandred or Semirag is. Messana is in the White Tower. That is all I know. I swear it. A tightness in her chest loosened when he finally nodded. You will find the others for me. It was not a question. All of them, Grendel. If you want me to believe anyone dead, show me a corpse. Very much wished she dared turn him into a corpse. Her gown rippled through violent shades of red, echoing the anger and fear and shame that rippled through her uncontrollably. Very well. Let him think her cowed for the moment. If he fed Messana to Althor, if he fed them all to Althor, so be it, so long as that kept Althor from her own throat. I will try. Do more than try, Grendel.
I know.
More than try.
When Grendel was gone, the gateway back to her palace in Aradoman closed. Samael let the smile dissolve on his face. His jaws ached from holding it. Grendel thought too much. She was so used to making others act for her that she failed to think of acting for herself. He wondered what she would say if she ever discovered that he had manipulated her as deftly as she had manipulated so many fools in her time. He would wager everything that she never saw his real purpose. Oh, Messana was inside the White Tower. Messana in the tower and Grendel in Aradoman. Had Grendel been able to see his face then, she would have known real fear. Whatever happened, Samael intended to be the one still standing on the day of return. To be named Nameless and defeat the Dragon Reborn.
Chapter 24. An Embassy. Standing away from the musicians on the street corner, a perspiring woman puffing at a long flute and a red-faced man plucking a 9-string bittern, Egwene threaded her way through the crowd with a light heart. The sun stood high in the sky, molten gold, and the paving stones were hot enough to burn through the soles of her soft boots. Sweat dripped from her nose, her shawl felt like a heavy blanket even looped loosely over her elbows, and there was enough dust in the air that she already wanted to wash, yet she smiled. Some people eyed her askance when they thought she was not looking, which almost made her laugh. That was how they looked at Aiel. People saw what they expected to see, and they saw a woman in Aiel garb, never noticing her eyes or her height. Hawkers and peddlers cried their wares, competing against the shouts of butchers and candle-makers, the rattle and clatter from silversmiths and potters' shops, the squeal of ungreased axles. Rough-tongued wagon drivers and men walking alongside ox carts loudly contested the way with dark-lacquered sedan chairs and sober coaches with house sigils on the doors. There were musicians everywhere, along with tumblers and jugglers. A knot of pale women in riding dresses carrying swords swaggered by, imitating how they imagined men behaved, laughing too raucously, and pushing their way in a manner that would have started a dozen fights in 100 paces had they been men. A blacksmith's hammer rang on his anvil. In general, a babble and hum of bustle hung in the air, the noise of a city that she'd almost forgotten among the Aiel. Perhaps she had missed it. She did laugh then, right there in the street. The first time she had heard the noise of a city, it had nearly stunned her. Sometimes it seemed that wide-eyed girl had been someone else. A woman working her bay mare through the crowd turned to look at her curiously. The horse had small silver bells tied in her long mane and tail, and the woman had more bells in the dark hair that hung halfway down her back. Pretty, she could not have been much older than Egwene, but she had a hardness to her face and a sharp eye, and no fewer than 6 knives at her belt, one nearly as large as an Aiel's. A hunter for the horn, no doubt. A tall, handsome man in a green coat, 2 swords on his back, watched the woman ride on. He was probably another. They seemed to be everywhere. As the crowd swallowed the woman on the bay, he turned and saw Egwene looking at him. Smiling with sudden interest, he squared broad shoulders and started toward her. Hastily, Egwene put on her coldest face, tried to combine Cerelia at her sternest with Swan Sanche, the stole of the Amerlin's seat around her shoulders. He stopped, looking surprised. As he turned away, she distinctly heard him growl, "Flaming Aiel." She could not help laughing again. He must have heard, despite the noise, because he stiffened, shaking his head. But he did not look back. Source of her good mood was twofold. One was the wise ones finally agreeing that walking in the city provided as much exercise as walking around it outside the walls. Cerelia in particular did not seem to understand why she wanted to spend a minute more than she had to among throngs of wetlanders, especially cramped inside walls. Mostly, though, she felt good because they had told her that now the headaches that had puzzled them so were completely gone. She had not been able to hide them altogether. She could return to Tel Riot soon. Not in time for the next meeting, 3 nights off, but before the one after. That was a relief in more ways than one. An end to having to sneak into the world of dreams. An end to laboriously working everything out for herself. An end to being terrified the wise ones would catch her and refuse to teach her anymore. An end to needing to lie. It was necessary. She could not afford to waste time. There was too much to learn, and she could not believe she would have time to learn it all.
Lay down.
But they would never understand.
Stupid.
Aiel dotted the crowd, both in Karinsor and in Guyshine white. The Guyshine went where they were sent, yet the others might well be inside the walls for their first time, and quite possibly their last. The Aiel really did not seem to like cities, though a good many had come in 6 days ago to see Mangen hang. It was said he put the noose around his own neck, and made some Aiel joke about whether the rope would break his neck or his neck the rope. She had heard several Aiel repeat the joke, but never a comment about the hanging. Rand had liked Mangan, she was sure of it. Berelain had informed the wise ones of the sentence as though telling them their wash would be ready the next day, and the wise ones had listened the same day. Egwene did not think she would ever understand Aiel. She was very much afraid she did not understand Rand anymore. As for Berelain, Egwene understood her all too well. That one was only interested in men who were alive. With thoughts like those, it took an effort to regain her good mood. The city was certainly no cooler than outside the walls. In fact, with no breeze and people so close, it might have been hotter, and nearly as dusty, but at least she was not trudging along with nothing to look at but the ashes of Foregate. A few more days and she would be able to learn again, to really learn. That put a smile back on her face. She stopped near a wiry, damp-faced illuminator. It was easy to tell what he was, or had been. His thick mustaches were not covered by the diaphanous veil Taraboners often wore, but baggy breeches embroidered on the legs and an equally loose shirt embroidered across the chest marked him well enough. He was selling finches and warblers in crudely made cages. With their chapter house burned by the Shido, a number of illuminators were trying to find the means to return to Tarabon. "I have it from the most reliable source," he was telling a handsome, graying woman in a plainly cut dark blue dress. A merchant, no doubt, catching a jump on those waiting for better times in Kyrian. "The Aes Sedai," the illuminator confided, leaning over a caged bird to whisper. "They are divided. The Aes Sedai, they are at war with one another." The merchant nodded agreement. Egwene stopped pretending to consider a green-headed finch and moved on, though she had to hop out of the way of a round-faced glee-man, striding along with self-important flourishes of his patch-covered cloak. Gleemen knew very well that they were among the few wetlanders welcome in the waste. Aiel did not intimidate them. At least they pretended so. That rumor troubled her. Not that the tower had split apart. That could not have been kept secret much longer, but talk of war between Aes Sedai. Knowing that Aes Sedai were set against Aes Sedai was like knowing one part of her family was set against another, just barely tolerable for knowing the reasons, yet the thought that it might come to more. If only there were some way to heal the tower, to make it whole again without bloodshed. A little farther down the street, a perspiring foregate woman who might have been pretty if her face were cleaner was dispensing rumor along with ribbons and pins from a tray hung from a neck strap. She wore a blue silk dress, slashed with red in the skirt, that had been made for a shorter woman. The heavily worn hem was high enough to show her stout shoes, and holes in the sleeves and bodice showed where embroidery had been picked out. "I tell you a fact," she informed the women, picking over her tray. "There has been Trollocs seen around the city. Ah, yes, that green will set off your eyes. Hundreds of Trollocs, and—" Egwene barely paused. If there had been even one Trolloc anywhere near the city, the Aiel would have known long before it became street gossip. She wished the wise ones gossiped. Well, they did sometimes, but only about other Aiel. As far as Aiel were concerned, nothing about wetlanders was very absorbing. Being able to pop into Elida's study in Tel Eiran Riad whenever she wanted and read the woman's letters had accustomed her to knowing what was happening in the world, though. Abruptly, Egwene realized she was looking around differently, looking at people's faces. There were Aes Sedai eyes and ears in Kyrian as surely as she was sweating. Elida must receive a report a day by pigeon from Kyrian, if not more. Tower spies, Aja spies, spies for individual Aes Sedai. They were everywhere, often where and who you least suspected. Why were those two tumblers just standing there? Were they catching their breath or watching her? They sprang back into action, one leaping up to a handstand on the other's shoulders. Spy for the Yellow Aja had once tried to bundle Elaine and Nynaeve off to Tar Valon on orders issued by Elida. Egwene did not actually know that Elida wanted her as well, but assuming anything else would be very foolish. Egwene could not make herself believe that Elida would forgive anyone who had worked closely for the woman she deposed. For that matter, some of the Aes Sedai in Salidar probably had eyes and ears here, too. If word ever reached them of Egwene Sedai of the Green Aja, it could be anybody. That skinny woman in the shop door apparently studying a bolt of dark gray cloth, or the blousy woman lolling beside the tavern door, flapping her apron at her face. Or that fat fellow with his pushcart full of pies. Why was he looking at her so strangely? She very nearly headed for the nearest city gate. It was the fat fellow who stopped her, or rather the way he suddenly tried to cover his pies with his hands. He was staring at her because she had been staring at him. He was probably afraid an Aiel savage was going to take some of his wares without paying. Egwene laughed weakly. Aiel. Even people who looked her in the face assumed she was Aiel. A tower agent who was looking for her would walk right past. Feeling a good deal better, she went back to meandering through the streets, listening where she could. The trouble was she had grown used to knowing things just weeks or even days after they happened, and with a certainty that they had happened. Rumor might cross 100 miles in a day or take a month, and it birthed 10 daughters every day. Today she learned that Swan had been executed because she unearthed the Black Aja, that Swan was Black Aja and still alive, that the Black Aja had driven those Aes Sedai who were not black from the tower. They were not new tales, only variations on old. One new story spreading like fire in the summer meadow was that the tower had been behind all the false dragons. That made her so angry she stalked away stiff-backed every time she heard it. Which meant she did a good bit of stiff-backed stalking. She heard that Andorans in Arengil had declared some noblewoman queen, Dylan, the name varied, now that Morghese was dead, which might be true, and that Aes Sedai were running around Arad-Doman doing very improbable things, which was certainly untrue. The Prophet was coming to Cairhien. The Prophet had been crowned king of Eildon. No, Amadisia. The Dragon Reborn had killed the Prophet for blasphemy. The Aiel were all leaving. No, they meant to settle and stay. Berelain was to be crowned on the Sun Throne. A skinny little man with shifty eyes nearly got himself beaten by his listeners outside a tavern for saying that Rand was one of the Forsaken, but Egwene stepped into that without thought. "Have you no honor?" she demanded coldly. The 4 coarse-faced men who had been on the point of grabbing the skinny fellow blinked at her. They were Cairhienan, not all that much taller than she, but much bulkier, with the broken noses and sunken knuckles of brawlers, yet she held them where they stood with her sheer intensity. That and the presence of Aiel in the street. They were not fool enough to become rough with an Aiel woman, as they thought in those circumstances. If you must face a man for what he says, face him one at a time in honor. This is not battle. You shame yourselves to go 4 at one. They stared at her as if she were mad, and slowly her face reddened. She hoped they thought it anger. Not how dare you pick on someone weaker, but how dare you not let him fight you one by one. She had just lectured them as if they followed Ji-Ito. Of course, if they did, there would have been no need to lecture. One of the men ducked his head in a sort of half-bow. His nose was not only crooked, the tip was missing. He is gone now. Mistress, can we go too?" It was true. The skinny man had used her interference to vanish. She felt a flash of contempt. Running because he feared to face 4. How could he bear the shame? Right, she was doing it again. She opened her mouth to say that of course they could, and nothing came out. They took her silence for assent, or maybe excuse, and hurried away, but she barely noticed them go. She was too busy staring at the back of a mounted party making its way up the street. She did not recognize the dozen or so green-cloaked soldiers forcing a path through the crowd, but who they escorted was a different matter. She could only see the backs of the women, 5 or 6, she thought, between the soldiers, just parts of their backs, but that was more than enough, much more. The women wore light dust cloaks, pale linen in shades of brown, and Egwene found herself staring right at what seemed to be a pure white disk embroidered on the back of one of those cloaks. Only the stitching picked out the white flame of Tar Valon from the borders signifying the white Aja. She caught a glimpse of green, of red. Red. 5 or 6 Aes Sedai riding toward the royal palace, where a copy of the dragon banner waved fitfully atop a stepped tower alongside one of Rand's crimson flags, bearing the ancient Aes Sedai symbol. Some called that the dragon banner, and others Althor's banner, or even the Aiel banner, and a dozen other names besides. Fling through the crowd, she followed them maybe 20 paces, then stopped. A red sister, at least one red that she had seen, had to mean this was the long-expected embassy from the tower, the one Elida had written would escort Rand to Tar Valon. More than 2 months since that letter arrived by a hard-riding courier, this party must have left not long behind. They would not find Rand, not unless he had slipped in unannounced. She had decided that he had somehow rediscovered the talent called traveling, but that put her no closer to knowing how it was done. Yet, whether they found Rand or not, they must not find Egwene. The best she could expect was to be hauled up short as an accepted out of the tower with no full sister to oversee her, and that could be expected only if Elida really was not hunting for her. Even then they would haul her back to Tar Valon and Elida. She had no illusions that she could resist 5 or 6 Aes Sedai. With a last look after the receding Aes Sedai, she gathered her skirts and began to run, dodging between people, sometimes caroming off them, ducking under the noses of teams pulling wagons or carriages. Angered shouts followed her. When she at last dashed through one of the tall, square-arched city gates, the hot wind hit her in the face. Unhindered by buildings, it carried sheets of dust that made her cough, but she kept running, all the way back to the Wise One's low tents. To her surprise, a sleek gray mare, saddle and bridle worked and fringed with gold, stood outside Amis's tent, in the charge of a Gaishain who kept his eyes down, except when patting the spirited animal. Ducking inside, she found the rider, Berelain, sipping tea with Amis and Bear and Cerelia, all stretched out on bright tasseled cushions. A white-robed woman, Rodera, knelt to one side, meekly waiting to refill cups. "There are Aes Sedai in the city," Egwene said as soon as she was inside, heading toward the Sun Palace. "It must be Elida's embassy to Rand." Berelain rose gracefully. Egwene had to admit, grudgingly, that the woman was graceful. And her riding dress was decently cut, for even she was not fool enough to go riding in the sun in her usual garb. The others rose with her. "I must return to the palace, it seems," she sighed. "The light knows how they will feel about no one there to greet them. Amis, if you know where Ruark is, could you send a message for him to meet me?" Amis nodded, but Cerelia said, "You should not depend on Ruark so much, girl. Rand al'Thor gave Cairhien to you to tend. Let most men have a finger, and they will have the whole hand before you know. Let a clan chief have a finger, and he will have the entire arm." "It is true," Amis murmured. "Ruark is the shade of my heart, but it is true." Pulling slim riding gloves from behind her belt, Berelain began tugging them on. "He reminds me of my father. Too much so, sometimes." For an instant she grimaced ruefully. "But he gives very good advice, and he knows when to loom and how much. I think even Aes Sedai must be impressed by Ruark staring at them." Amis laughed in her throat. "He is impressive. I will send him to you." She kissed Berelain lightly on the forehead and each cheek. Egwene stared. That was how a mother kissed her son or daughter. What was going on between Berelain and the Wise Ones? She could not ask, of course. Such a question would be shaming to her and to the Wise Ones, to Berelain too, though Berelain would not know it, and Egwene would not mind shaming Berelain until her hair fell out. As Berelain turned to leave the tent, Egwene put a hand on the woman's arm. "They must be handled carefully. They'll not be friendly toward Rand, but the wrong words, a wrong move, could make them open enemies." That was true enough, but not what she needed to say. She would rather have her tongue torn out than ask a favor of Berelain. "I have dealt with Aes Sedai before, Egwene Sedai," the other woman said dryly. Egwene refrained from drawing a deep breath. It had to be done, but she would not let this woman see how hard it was. "Elida means no good to Rand, no more than a weasel means to a chicken, and these Aes Sedai are Elida's. If they learn of an Aes Sedai on Rand's side here where they can reach her, they might just disappear one day soon after." Looking into Berelain's unreadable face, she could not make herself say more. After a long moment, Berelain smiled. "Egwene Sedai, I will do whatever I can for Rand." Both smile and tone of voice insinuated. "Girl," Cerelia said sharply, and for a wonder spots of color bloomed in Berelain's cheeks. Not looking at Egwene, Berelain said in a carefully neutral voice, "I would appreciate it if you did not tell Ruark." In fact, she was not looking at anyone, but she tried to ignore Egwene's presence. "We will not," Amis put in quickly, leaving Cerelia with her mouth open. "We will not." The repetition was directed at Cerelia with a blend of firmness and asking, and at last the eldest Wise One nodded, if somewhat grudgingly. Berelain actually sighed with relief before ducking out of the tent. "That child has spirit," Cerelia laughed as soon as Berelain was gone. Reclining on the cushions again, she patted the space next to her for Egwene. We should find the right husband for her, a man to match her, if such exists among wetlanders. Wiping her hands and face with the damp cloth Rodera brought, Egwene wondered whether that was enough opening to ask about Berylane in good honor. She accepted a teacup of green sea-folk porcelain and took her place in the circle of wise ones. If one of the others responded to Cerelia, that might be enough. "Are you certain these Aes Sedai mean harm to the Karakarn?" Amis asked instead. Egwene colored, thinking about gossip when there were important matters to attend. "Yes," she replied quickly, then more slowly, "at least, I don't know that they mean to harm him exactly. Not intentionally, anyway." Elida's letter had mentioned all the honor and respect he deserved. How much did a former Red Sister think any man who could channel deserved? But I don't doubt they will want to control him somehow, make him do what Elida wants. They aren't his friends. How much were the Salidar Aes Sedai his friends? Light she needed to talk with Nynaeve and Elaine. "And they will not care that he is the Karakarn," Cerelia grunted sourly. "You believe they will try to harm you?" Bear asked, and Egwene nodded. "If they discover I'm here..." She tried to cover a shiver by sipping her mint tea. Whether as a handle on Rand or as an unsupervised accepted, they would do their best to haul her back to the tower. "They'll not leave me free if they can help it. Elida will not want Rand listening to anyone but her." Bear and Amis exchanged grim looks. "Then the answer is simple." Cerelia sounded as if it had all been decided. "You will stay among the tents, and they will not find you. Wise ones avoid Aes Sedai in any case. If you remain with us a few more years, we will make a fine wise one of you." Egwene almost dropped her cup. "You flatter me," she said carefully. "But sooner or later I will have to go." Cerelia did not look convinced. Egwene had learned to hold her own with Amis and Bear after a fashion, but Cerelia... "Not soon, I think," Bear told her, with a smile to take the sting out. "You have much to learn yet." "Yes, and eager to get back to it," Amis added. Egwene struggled not to blush, and Amis frowned. "You look odd. Did you overuse yourself this morning? I was sure you had recovered enough." "I have," Egwene said hastily. "Truly, I have. I haven't had a headache in days. It was the dust running back here, and the crowd in the city was more than I remembered, and I was so excited I didn't breakfast very well." Cerelia motioned to Rodera. "Bring some honey bread if there is any, and cheese, and any fruit you can find." She poked Egwene in the ribs. "A woman should have some flesh to her." That from a woman who looked as if she had been left in the sun till most of her flesh had dried away. Egwene did not really mind eating. She had been too excited to eat this morning, but Cerelia watched every bite go down, and her scrutiny made swallowing a little difficult. That and the fact that they wanted to discuss what to do about the Aes Sedai. If the Aes Sedai were hostile to Rand, they would have to be watched, and a way found to safeguard him. Even Cerelia was a bit edgy about the possibility that they might be putting themselves against Aes Sedai directly. Not afraid. It was going against custom that made them uneasy. But whatever was necessary to protect the Karakarn had to be done. For Egwene's part, she worried that they might turn Cerelia's suggestion that she remain among the tents into a command. There would be no way to evade that one. No way to avoid 50 eyes except by staying inside her own tent. How did Rand travel? The wise ones would do whatever was necessary so long as it did not touch Ji-Ito. Wise ones might interpret it differently here and there, but they held to their interpretation as tightly as any other Aiel. Light Rodera was Shido, one of thousands captured in the battle that drove the Shido away from the city, but the wise ones treated her no differently than any other Gaishine, and as far as Egwene could see, Rodera behaved no differently than any other Gaishine, not in the slightest. They would not go against Ji-Ito, no matter how necessary it might be. Fortunately, the subject did not come up. Unfortunately, the question of her health did. The wise ones did not know healing or how to check someone's health with the power. Instead, they tested with their own methods. Some seemed familiar from when she had studied under Nynaeve to become a wisdom, peering into her eyes, listening to her heart through a hollow wooden tube. Some were distinctly Aiel. She touched her toes until she felt dizzy, jumped up and down in one place until she thought her eyes would bounce out of her head, and ran around the Wise One's tents until spots swam before her, then had water poured over her head by a Gaishine, drank as much as she could hold, gathered up her skirts, and ran some more. Aiel were great believers in hardiness. Had she been a step too slow, had she staggered to a halt before Amis said she could, they would have decided her health was not sufficiently recovered after all. Cerelia finally nodded and said, "You are as sound as a maiden, girl." Egwene was swaying and gulping for air. A maiden would not have been, she was sure. Still, she felt pride. She had never thought of herself as soft, but she knew very well that before she began living with the Aiel, she would have fallen on her face halfway through the test. Another year, she thought, and I will run as well as any Far Daraismai. On the other hand, she was hardly up to returning to the city. She joined the Wise Ones in their sweat tent. For once they did not make her pour water over the hot rocks. Rodera did that, luxuriating in the damp heat as it relaxed her muscles, and only left because Ruark and two other clan chiefs, Timolan of the Miagoma and Indirian of the Kodara, joined them, tall, massive, graying men with hard, sober faces. That sent her diving out of the tent to hastily wrap her shawl around her. She always expected to hear laughter when she did that, but the Aiel never seemed to understand why she hurried from the sweat tent whenever men came in. It would have fit right into Aiel humor if they had, but luckily they just did not make the connection, for which she was very glad. Gathering the rest of her clothes in her arms from the neat piles outside the sweat tent, she hurried back to her own. The sun was sitting low now, and after a light meal she was ready to fall asleep, too tired to even think of Tel'aran'rhiod. Too tired to remember most of her dreams either. That was something the Wise Ones had been teaching her, but most of those she did remember were about Gawain. Chapter 25. Like lightning and rain. For some reason, when Coenda came to wake her in the gray before...
Alright, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support.